Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. In my last video, I talked about how to plan your garden. In this video, I just kind of wanted to elaborate on that, kind of give some more details, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just what was in my last video. So let's get started. We're basically just going to be talking about timing a lot more, and seed starting goes along with that. So for my garden, how I do it is I look at the seed catalogs or the seed packets. Usually the seed packets give more information on when you need to be starting those seeds. And that can help you plan what you want to put where in your garden. For example, I know that green beans do better in my area, I think with most areas, if you plant them in the spring and in the fall. So I know that I'm going to have 2 crops of green beans, so I know that I need to get those started sooner. I also know that I'm going to be planting all of my squash a little bit later this year to help avoid squash bugs. So I can go ahead and plan on planting something else in those spots until I'm ready to plant my squash. I'm going to be planting some root vegetables, things that go in a little bit earlier so that they have plenty of time to finish before I'm ready to put in my squash. Those are just a couple of examples of things that planning ahead helps to figure out when you want to put things in and where you want to put certain things. I'm going to give you guys some examples of figuring out when to start something. I know that all of my lettuces are cold weather crops, and I know I'm going to be starting those all really soon. Now, they all have different growing times to when you can harvest them, and each of their seed packets will say that on them. Just like this Ice Queen lettuce says 80 days on it. It also has a little area at the bottom of the seed packet that says direct seed in spring 2 to 4 weeks before last frost, or start indoors and transplant when individual plants are about 3 inches tall. And then in fall, plant 6 to 8 weeks before first frost. So all I would do is go online and in my search bar type in my zip code and last frost date. And that's going to give me a decently accurate date of when I can expect the last frost to be. Now, this is not always 100% accurate. It's going to vary depending on the year. I mean, obviously weather is very variable. It just depends. But we can at least get an idea of when that's going to be, to give us a date to go off of when to plant our plants. So I know that my last frost date is around April 20th. And I know that I need to direct seed these in spring 2 to 4 weeks before the last frost. So I'm just gonna go to my last frost and count back 2 to 4 weeks depending on whenever I wanna do it. In my area, I tend to wait a little bit longer, a week or 2 longer, so I'd probably go with the 2 weeks before the last frost, just because it never fails. We end up getting a late frost if I plant too early, and I would rather just not lose those plants and waste those seeds as opposed to getting a 2-week jump start. I do, however, have a cold frame this year that my husband just built for me, so I am going to start some lettuces and different things in that a little bit sooner, and that's something else to take into consideration. You can start things inside a greenhouse or inside your house on the windowsill, and that gives you a little bit of extra growing time so you can get things started sooner and then plant it outside whenever it's safe for that plant to be in the weather. With this lettuce, I think I am going to start some lettuce, probably most of my lettuces, in the cold frame, and then I'm also going to start my cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, all the brassicas that do better in cold weather. If I have enough room in my cold frame, I'm not really sure yet because I haven't used it yet. But I'm going to see how much I can get started in there, and then for the longer season things that need more room to grow, I'll take those starts out and put them in the garden around the last frost date, maybe a little bit sooner, since they can take a little bit colder weather, and then they'll have more room to grow. But at least then I have more room to start things, because I usually can't set up my greenhouse here until, I should probably wait until mid-April, because we get such high winds in the spring with the weather changing, it never fails. My greenhouse gets blown over and kills my plants, and I'm just not willing to do that this year, at least until I get a more substantial greenhouse that can stand up to the wind and not get blown over. So that's how I'm going to do things this year, and those are all things that you have to take into consideration when you're trying to figure out when to plant things. And then there's lots of other things, obviously, than just lettuce and brassicas and all that. I know that my loofah plants take a really long season. These are just seeds that I saved myself from last year, so obviously I don't have any planting instructions on that, but I do have the original seed packet from the seeds that I bought. And I also have my gardening journal that I write down everything in, and that contains all the planting information. So that way, if I do end up throwing away this seed packet once it's out of seeds and I have my own that I've saved, I still have that information to look back on about when to plant it and how to plant it. This says direct sow seeds after the soil has warmed in late spring. Now I know that these plants take a really long time to really mature, because not only do the gourds have to grow on the vine, but then you have to let them dry out on the vine, and that takes quite a while. So I know I'm gonna have to start these a lot sooner than I did last year, so I'll be starting those probably inside. I'm hoping to get some grow lights this year so that I can start these inside and still get a harvest, but you could always start them in a greenhouse. I'm not sure about a cold frame because I don't know yet how warm it's going to be in my cold frame, but all of them are different depending on how well insulated they are. That's just something that you basically have to learn from trial and error and see what can grow in there, and maybe put a thermometer in there the first year so you can keep track of what the temperatures are to see if you can grow the more warm weather plants in that specific container. And then of course we have the green beans that I know I'm going to start earlier this year. Last year I started them a little bit later and it got too hot too quick and I didn't get a great harvest, and I also didn't plant enough, like I said in my last video. So I know this year I'm going to plant a lot more of them, and I'm going to plant them earlier, and I'm really hoping that I can get a much better harvest out of them this year. As far as the squash goes, they are a hot weather plant. Even winter squash, I know it sounds like those might be grown in cold weather, but they're not. They're all warm weather plants. So if you want to start those early in the season, you might want to start them inside in a greenhouse, etc. But as for me, I'm trying to avoid squash bugs, so I'm just probably going to just direct sow those in my garden, probably early June, early to mid-June, and see how that works. But they can be direct sown, you don't have to start those super early. For my cucumbers this year, it says on the packet that this specific type of cucumbers takes 60 days. Now you have to keep in mind that different varieties of different plants may take different amounts of days to come to maturity, and also that when it says 60 days, that typically means 60 days from when you transplant it into the ground. So if you're starting something inside, it's not going to be 60 days from when you plant that seed in the pot in your greenhouse. It's 60 days from when you plant it in your garden, which that's something I didn't realize before, and I was wondering why all of my plants were taking so much longer than the seed packet said to mature. And then I watched a YouTube video that said that, and I was like, duh, why didn't I think of that? So that's something you want to keep in mind. This seed packet also says to direct seed in hills of 4 to 6 seeds after danger of frost has passed. You can start indoors, but do so only 3 weeks before transplanting, and be sure to use large pots because the roots don't like to be disturbed. I did start these indoors last year, about 3 weeks before I planned on planting them outside, and I didn't end up getting them outside as soon as I had hoped because we had a pretty cold, wet spring, and they did fine. I did plant them in decent sized little pots, and the roots weren't super disturbed whenever I transplanted them, and the plants ended up doing decently well. So you do want to actually do what it says on the seed packet, because that's probably going to give you the best results. These directions are from people who have grown these seeds and figured out how they do best, but but at the same time, it may be different in your area. Plants grow differently all across the country, all across the world. If what it says on the packet doesn't work for you the first time you try it, then try something a little bit differently next time. This worked for me, so I'm gonna do that again this year. An example of that is like with these watermelons that I planted last year. On the packet it says direct seed after danger of frost has passed. Can be started indoors 3 weeks prior to last frost. I've heard a lot of people say that the best way to plant watermelons is to direct seed them because they really don't like being disturbed after they've been planted. But I personally have found that they do a lot better if I start them earlier indoors and kind of get them going a little bit. I don't know why that works better in my area, but it does. Or in my specific garden, it works better. So that's just what I'm going to do. It may be different with different varieties, maybe. This is the only watermelon that I've ever planted here in my garden. And I do want to try more, so I guess I'll have to give that a try with the next variety that I try and just see if it's still the same. It might be and it might not. It's trial and error in gardening. Another thing that you have to keep in mind when you're going to start all your seeds, if you're starting any inside, is what you have room for. A few years ago when I didn't have a greenhouse, I had to start all of my plants on this windowsill here in my kitchen. I only had room for 2 or 3 trays of seeds. But in my greenhouse, obviously I have room for a lot more, so there's a lot more that I can start beforehand and get started earlier. And whenever you can start things earlier like that, you have room to rotate in maybe a second or third crop that year, also depending on your climate where you are. So for me, I live in the Midwest. We get a very cold winter. We don't have a super long growing season like a lot of people in the South do. You can extend that growing season with row covers or with a cold frame and greenhouses. There are many ways that you can extend that season and get a bigger harvest throughout the year. So if you plan on doing that, you need to plan ahead so that you know that you have all the supplies that you need to get there. I am planning my garden on a budget. So these are things that I've kind of just had to slowly acquire over the years, and that's okay. Because in the meantime, before you have all of the equipment to really extend your growing season as far as you can, you're still learning from the time that you do have. And I found that very important, and there are so many lessons that I have learned along the way before I've even gotten to where I am now, and I know that I still have a long way to go with learning how to garden and learning the best ways to extend my season. Something else that you want to think about when you're planning your garden is what kind of structures you have in your actual garden space. That's always something that you want to think about beforehand, and it gives you a little bit more time to figure out the best way to do it, and if you're on a budget like me, to save up the money and get what you really want, or at least get you started on it. Well, I think that's about all that I can think of to share with you today. I hope this helps a little bit, clear up anything from my last video that I didn't get to. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me and I will try my hardest to help. Thanks for watching today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.